Hey everyone, Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton here with a special Judicial Watch issue update. We're honored to be joined here this afternoon or today by Congressman Andrew Clyde, who is a representative of Georgia's 9th District, who's here to talk about the current crisis, I think is the best way to put it, and what Congress can do about it. And before we get into that, where in Georgia do you represent? Where's your district?
Well, Tom, thank you for having me on. I represent Georgia's 9th District. That's the northeast corner of Georgia. That would be Gainesville and all the way up into Rabun County. So we touch Tennessee, North and South Carolina, just that upper corner, the foothills of the Smoky Mountains, the most beautiful district in all of Georgia.
Oh, really? I may have to go down that way. So you've been down, I've been bemoaning the fact that Congress has been out of office or been on recess for 7 weeks, but you all have gotten back, and today is, we started off with an announcement here with the Speaker saying that he's going to direct at least two of the committees, Congressman Comer's committee and Congressman Jordan's committee, the House Oversight Committee and the Judiciary Committee, to initiate finally Biden in an impeachment inquiry into President Biden. What's your initial reaction to that news?
Well, I think it's long overdue. I mean, we've been seeing the evidence of the Biden crime family coming out, especially in the Oversight Committee and some in the Judiciary Committee for months and months and months now. And I'm glad to hear that we're beginning that. I think it's necessary. I think we need to hold the president accountable for what he has done and how our country is being leveraged for his personal profit.
I'm sure you've been back in the district for some time, for the last month or two.
Mm-hmm.
What have folks been telling you about what's going on up here? Is it a surprise to you that Speaker McCarthy came back and the first thing he did after the recess of 7 weeks is to announce impeachment? Or are you hearing that from your supporter, from your constituents back home?
Most definitely. I've been hearing that honestly for over a year now.
Yeah.
In our district. We are literally the most conservative district in all of Georgia. And people want the government to be held accountable. And when the President of the United States is involved in such incredible corruption like what we are seeing coming out, the evidence coming out of the Oversight and the Judiciary Committees, then people are upset about that. You know, but also they want us to get back to work and to get back to dealing with the weaponization of the government.
Well, we have this personal corruption issue by Biden. And impeachment obviously is necessary. It's obviously not sufficient, as we'll get into. And then the mirror of that is the corruption of the abuse of government abuse targeting President Trump and other innocent Americans. The effort to jail Trump in Washington, D.C., the D.C. prosecutor's office operating in Florida, and then Democratic Party politicians in New York and Georgia also seeking to jail Trump. And, you know, the left would have us believe, or frankly the establishment would have us believe, well, these prosecutions, there's nothing you can do about it. It's just like the rain. You know, the weather's going to happen and these prosecutions are going to occur and there's nothing that can be done about it. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today was because you beg to differ.
I do beg to differ. You know, I think people are tired of all talk and no action. And that's what Congress is famous for, and I don't believe in that. I believe that when there's something that you can do, you do it, and you take action. And this is clearly election interference. You know, Joe Biden's running for president again, and he's having all these issues now where his corruption is coming to light, and he wants to do everything he possibly can to diminish the opportunities of his primary opponent, which is President Trump. So he is going to use, and he said back in November of last year, in a press conference that he would use the entire power of the government to keep President Trump from coming back into office. And so when you say that sort of thing and then you see the weaponization of the Department of Justice, where they are going after President Trump for literally, pardon the pun, trumped up charges,
right.
Okay, that it's unconscionable and you have to deal with it. And the way you deal with it is you defund it. Congress has the power of the purse. It's the most powerful thing we can do. We are at the apex of our power right now, the beginning of a new fiscal year. So I am introducing two amendments I'm on the Appropriations Committee. I'm actually on the Commerce, Justice, Science Subcommittee that deals directly with the budget of the Department of Justice. And so I'm introducing 2 amendments, one to defund at the federal level any money going to the prosecution of a presidential candidate between now and the November 24 elections. All right, and then the second amendment will deal with any federal money going to a state or local jurisdiction that prosecutes a presidential candidate. We will eliminate both of them, and that will basically defund the entire prosecution. They can investigate all they want, but they can't prosecute.
So they could spend no taxpayer money pursuing the prosecution currently up here in D.C. on the challenges to the election that President Trump was involved in, nor in Florida. And how would it work with the jurisdictions in New York, the county of Manhattan up there, and Fulton County? Would all federal funding for that state or Georgia be cut off, or how much money and what would be at issue for the states?
Well, it would be the entity that actually does the prosecution.
Right.
Okay. It would not be the state. All right. It would be the prosecutor. All right. And we would completely defund the prosecutor's office of all federal money. And trust me, every state prosecutor gets federal money, and there's a fair bit of it that they get. And so that would go to zero. And I think, of course, they don't have to do that. They could simply say, all right, we're not going to prosecute until after the election. So, but that's not what they want. What they want is election interference, because what that does, Tom, is it makes the process the penalty here. And we can't allow that, because you can't really recover from that. You look at one of the court cases is going to be the week of Super Tuesday. Seriously, start Monday, so there's no opportunity to have a major rally that Monday evening prior to Super Tuesday? I mean, that takes the President Trump, out of the ability to effectively campaign the way he wants to.
That's right.
That's election interference right there.
And the Georgia case is so broad that it would actually freeze the entire campaign operation if he was being very cautious in his communications about what he was talking about on the campaign trail, with not only his colleagues in the campaign, but at the Republican National Committee, and other Georgia leaders are implicated. I think the head of the Georgia Republican Party down there, Mr. Schaefer, isn't he?
Well, there's a lot that.
So the point is, they're freezing the political campaigns through these prosecutions as well, which I don't think. I don't understand why judges would accept that invitation to do that. But secondly, it's so obviously corrupted. But what sort of feedback are you getting from your colleagues on this? What I love about this is that there are many of your friends and colleagues on the Hill, and we're talking Republicans mostly here, because Democrats obviously have no problem with jailing their political opponents, obviously, evidently. But the Republicans pretend to be upset about it, or some do, but will fund it. And I think there's got to be some kind of accountability or reckoning for that position. And so, your effort, and I think there's some other members who have similar efforts to push this issue, is well worth taking.
Well, this will be their opportunity, to show where they stand. Do they stand for funding the prosecution of a primary political opponent in a presidential race, or do they not? Will they stand against it? It doesn't mean that it won't ever happen. It just means it can't happen until the presidential election of 2024. I mean, that's the important thing right there. Let the people decide who they want to vote for, and not some prosecutor. Think about this. You've got these grand juries from these very liberal areas, vastly Democrat areas. You've got a Democrat prosecutor, you've got a Democrat judge, you've got a Democrat grand jury, and now a criminal jury pool coming from the same Democrat base. Do you think the president's going to have a fair trial in any of these cases? No. So it's got to be defunded, so that liberty and election integrity and justice prevails.
It's election rigging, in my view.
I would agree.
So the timing of this. So let's, people kind of yawn when they hear the word budget, and I don't blame them, especially in Washington, since really nothing seems to change. Every year they just fund the same, what they funded the last year, plus a little bit extra, or more recently, a lot extra. And you're trying to change that. Members of the House Freedom Caucus and other conservatives on the Hill are trying to change that. and kind of address the timing of this rider, this appropriations amendment that you're talking about, and why it is that there's maybe a leverage point that otherwise may not be available at another time of the year.
Well, that's what the Speaker fight in January was all about, and that was to fundamentally change the way Congress operates so that we're not doing, like you said, the same thing all over again, just, continuing to add the same amount of money plus a little extra or a lot extra and doing exactly the same thing. That's not why the people of this great country gave us the majority. They wanted to see Congress be changed, and that's what we did in January, and to change the process, and now we're implementing that process, which is why an unqualified or a blind or a clean CR, whatever you want to call it, is simply not going to work.
So they need by the end of October, when is it? What's the deadline these days? Is it October?
It's 31st, midnight, 31st, it's midnight on the 30th of September,
So September.
not the 1st of October.
So this is a DC classic. Let's go on vacation for 7 weeks and come back to an emergency budget issue that we've created because we've been on vacation in part for 7 weeks. So unless there's a, quote, a continuing resolution, parts of the government will shut down. Of course, we can pick and choose what parts to shut down, but that's another debate. And the argument from you and others is, conservatives on the Hill, that a clean continuing resolution, which is business as usual, is unacceptable. We need to take steps now to defund and protect our, defund the prosecutions of Trump and to protect our elections, defund censorship, protect our border, stop mutilating children. Whatever the federal funding issue is, we're just not going to continue. This is an opportunity for us to say no. What do you think is going to be the outcome? What do you think is? Where do you see Mr. McCarthy in terms of this big fight? Because it really is about what Speaker McCarthy supports or is willing to endorse, isn't it?
Well, I will tell you, there are many conservatives that are absolutely committed to not supporting a clean CR, and I'm one of them, because to do that would simply further not just the spending levels, but the policy of Speaker Pelosi. And if we're going to do that, we're no different than the Democrats. But we're not. We're conservative Republicans, and we're going to fight to make sure that that doesn't happen. So there has to be.
So every bad thing that you, every listener or viewer, hates about the Biden administration or DC spending generally, some of it predates Biden, is about to be funded in full by the Republican Congress, unless these amendments are passed that restrain it or correct it as within reason. Not nearly enough, but within reason to address some of the more critical issues out there, like trying to jail everyone who opposes Biden, or censor tens of millions of Americans, other minor issues like that.
Yeah, exactly. So we are not going to continue the policies of our Democrat predecessors. We are going to secure our borders. We're going to defund the radical, weaponized federal government. We have to deal with issues like that, or we will fail. And we can't fail. This is not an area where we can fail.
So let me play devil's advocate.
Sure.
These kind of emergency fights we never win, we being conservatives. They're going to get what they want, and we just want to move this along, and we're going to fight it in the regular process with these appropriation bills when we pass them individually in the beginning of next year. Right? Am I fairly characterizing their argument?
Well, that was the statement back when we had the debt ceiling fight.
Right.
Okay.
But that's the statement they make every time.
Right. Exactly. And I'm on the Appropriations Committee. I'm committed to 12 individual appropriations.
Right.
We've got 10 of them through the Appropriations Committee so far. We've got 2 more. Arguably 2 of the most important. One being Commerce, Justice, Science, the Justice Department, and addressing the weaponization of the Justice Department. And then we've got of the 10 that are available to come to the House floor, 1 has already been passed. That's MilCon VA. We've got 9 more that we could be addressing right now. And I think defense is going to come up this week. But we need to be, honestly, Tom, we need to stay here until we get all of those appropriations done. That's what we promised the American people, and I believe in upholding my promises, and I will work relentlessly to make that happen.
So how does that intersect with the issue of the continuing resolution? You're suggesting that a continuing resolution for months is inappropriate in that regard, or regardless of whether it's clean or has significant reforms attached to it? How does that work with the appropriations process?
A clean resolution, a clean CR, a continuing resolution, is absolutely inappropriate, 100%. And I think that Speaker McCarthy would have to go to a significant, probably well over 100 Democrats for their support to get that in the House. And if he does, then in my humble opinion, I think he risks the Republican majority, and he risks his position as Speaker as well. The American people would simply not give us the majority again, because we'd be no different. But
so the point is that McCarthy will end up governing with a minority of Republicans working with Democrats to advance Joe Biden's
agenda,
policy agenda.
Right, and that is a recipe for disaster and failure.
Do you think he'll do that?
I sure hope he doesn't.
You sure?
I mean, it
well,
would.
Well, we're not paying you to hope. we want the benefit of your 3 years experience on Capitol Hill working with the Speaker.
I will make sure, to the best of my ability, that he doesn't.
So I want to, before we move on, you've been talking to constituents, and my impression is that your colleagues, no matter where they are hearing a lot on these corruption issues that you're talking about. And the establishment would have you believe that talking to your members of Congress and calling doesn't make a difference. And I know that's not the case.
It's not.
And so I guess my point is that you've got to call your member of Congress and share your views on this. And I'm not going to presume to tell you what to say other than to be polite and professional. And maybe you don't agree with anything we're talking about. You still should call your members of Congress. And if they don't pick up the phone, believe me, they notice how much the phones are ringing, even if they can't get to the calls. And so if you don't want Speaker McCarthy to do what he's,
typically done in the past,
which has a record having done very recently in the debt ceiling fight, I think it's fair to say that was the same. He's taken this he sees himself as the head of a parliament at times where he works in coalition with parties as opposed to governing, as opposed to being the head of the Republicans through the House speakership. It's really incredible. I want to talk about the defense issue because you're a highly decorated veteran, and I thank you for your service in that regard.
It's an honor to serve.
Thank you. And I encourage you to look up the Congressman's record. It's really tremendous. I am in fear for our military. It is being run by leftists and weak military generals who are seeking to alienate our troops from the country it defends through critical race theory and Marxist training. And to me, we're in a crisis. I mean, Tuberville's getting attacked for trying to uphold the rule of law against an entire Pentagon Biden military culture that would, thinks it's important to kill our unborn as part of our national defense strategy. What is happening, and how can we address this crisis in the immediate future? Because I think obviously I agree with your political approach. It's people can differ on the tactics, but I generally agree. My general thinking is these are things that we can't wait for next year on. We can't wait for next year to ensure Trump doesn't go to jail. We can't wait for next year to make sure that tens of millions of Americans aren't censored, or that our troops and our rising leadership in the academies aren't being abused with this racial anti-American propaganda. It's got to stop immediately. And on the military side, what sort of feedback are you hearing? I mean, is all the leadership completely lost to us, and we have to kind of redo our military leadership or replace the General Officer Corps? Are good people leaving in droves in the sorts of positions that you were when you retired as a commander?
I did in 05.
I mean, are folks, you know, I don't need to tell you as a veteran, you know, who makes the military run in terms of the officer corps. What is happening? Give us an update as to the reaction to this politicization of our military and the danger it presents to our national security.
Well, I'll tell you that first off, the vaccine mandate, the unconstitutional vaccine mandate, did great damage to our military because there were a lot of very, you know, strong conservatives that ended up leaving or being forced out of the military because of their sincerely held religious beliefs against a vaccine mandate, and so many of them were kicked out. We're dealing with that in the National Defense Authorization Act to allow them back into the military. The leadership of our military right now, you know, reflects the leadership of the Biden administration, and that is very poor. We saw that in Afghanistan. We saw the debacle of probably the biggest disaster our nation has ever seen in the withdrawal or retreat out of Afghanistan. It showed weakness, great weakness on the world stage. It showed incompetence of our military leadership. They are more concerned with what pronoun that you want to be called by, and so we don't hurt your feelings. Let me tell you that none of our enemies, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, none of them care one little bit. There's not even a thought about the pronoun of their soldiers. All right? They simply want to be the most lethal soldiers in the world, and we can't allow that. We have to be that in order to protect the democracy and the freedom, the liberty of our nation. And that right now is in great peril. And I'll tell you right now, I'm so proud of Tommy Tuberville, Senator Tuberville in the Senate. The Senate has the ability to do what the House can't do, and that is they have the right to either approve or deny all senior military promotions in the Senate. That is required to go through the Senate. Well, he can hold it up, and he's holding up 300 senior military promotions. And simply because the military unilaterally has decided to violate federal law in paying the travel claims of military members going across state lines for abortions. Abortions, that's murdering helpless unborn children. And that's exactly what it is. It's murder. And so I am 100% with Senator
And it's
Tuberville.
prohibited under law.
It is prohibited under law, and the military is doing it anyway, okay? And that just shows you their disrespect for the law. But they're towing the line of the Biden administration. So it's very concerning. It has to be defunded. The defense appropriation that we will be dealing with this week defunds a lot of that, prevents critical race theory from being taught or funded. We are defunding the diversity, equity, and inclusion office in the Pentagon. I mean, can you imagine the Pentagon actually has one of those?
Yeah.
But it's being defunded as part of our appropriation, their defense appropriation. These are all the kind of things that have to be addressed, and they have to be addressed as quickly as we can, and that is through the power of the purse, which begins October 1 of this year, in under 3 weeks.
So I want to talk about your life before Congress. You were you sold guns for a living, right?
That's correct.
You had a successful business in Georgia. Mm-hmm. The Second Amendment is under consistent attack by the left. And I always highlight, and it's worth reviewing I always encourage people, I'm not a lawyer, but I always encourage people to read the Supreme Court decisions because they're really written for the people. And the Supreme Court decision upholding our Second Amendment rights highlighted it's not just the Second Amendment that's at issue here, it's the 14th Amendment.
That's right.
So when they attack the Second Amendment, there are other civil liberties that are attacked with that. And we're kind of seeing that in New Mexico. Could you describe the Biden administration's crazed obsession with banning guns? I think it's a fair way of characterizing it.
It is.
And respond to what you're seeing in New Mexico, and talk about another opportunity maybe for an appropriations right or to protect good citizens in New Mexico from this abuse by their governor.
Well, I'll tell you, when what President Biden can't get through the House through proper legislation, he's going to attempt to get through by rewriting a definition, redefining a definition, writing a rule through the ATF to come against the Second Amendment. And it's so important that we have a Second Amendment. Our founding fathers were such brilliant men. Our First Amendment, the right to speak, to assemble peaceably, to bring the government your grievances, to worship where you choose, that right is so important, but it can never be maintained without a Second Amendment. The Second Amendment is truly the teeth behind the First Amendment, and that's what keeps that First Amendment secure. And so if you want to get at the First Amendment, you got to attack the Second Amendment first. And that's exactly what's happening. And I think what you're seeing in New Mexico is a governor that is pushing the envelope to see just how far she can get, all right, before she gets pushback. And honestly, I hope they impeach her, because she has clearly violated the Constitution. The New York Rifle and Pistol versus Braun was such a great decision. First, you had the Heller decision in 2008. You had McDonald v. Chicago in, I think, 2012 or 2014. Now you've got this one.
So the New York decision, that was the one I was referencing that mentioned the 14th Amendment being vindicated in protecting your rights to carry a weapon.
That's right. 3 incredible pro-Second Amendment Supreme Court decisions. And honestly, I don't think we would have had New York Rifle and Pistol versus Braun, that incredible win, if we didn't have 3 conservative Supreme Court justices
appointed by
President Trump. Okay, so his legacy begins right there.
Well, I'm not making a statement for behalf any candidate for public office, but certainly with the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court picks by President Trump and his ability to get those through, he has been the most consequential president in the modern era in terms of policy.
Yes.
And I mean, that's just, to me, just a gosh darn fact. And some people may not like the consequences of that policy, but they are consequential in ways that are rather significant. And
I will tell you also that he taught we Republicans how to fight, right, and how to win. And that's why I think the left fears him so much and are trying to do everything in their power to make sure he doesn't become president again. I've never seen what we're seeing in our country, in any other country, other than banana republics. The weaponization of our government against political opponents and against conservatives, against free speech. And you can just look at example after example. Look at the school board meetings in the FBI.
Yeah.
I mean, it's terrible what they're trying to do to silence conservative voices, and we can't allow that to happen.
Well, I encourage your leadership, and I'm encouraged by your leadership. And I know Americans get frustrated about these issues, but I can tell you, none of these issues will advance without the work of individuals, and especially if you've got leaders in the right place at the right time, and see their opportunities in taking them, as you are. We can really achieve significant results. That's why I get frustrated. But I'm hopeful at the same time, because it doesn't take that much in terms of leadership, and a little bit of leadership goes a long way. And to the degree you can communicate that to Speaker McCarthy, because I think he has opportunities to be an historic speaker if he wants to take them.
Yep, and I've told him that personally. I said, you could be one of the most consequential speakers in my lifetime if you will take on what we conservatives are fighting for and fight with us.
Well, you can be sure you will have a friend in Judicial Watch that agrees you want to advance government accountability, transparency, and you want to fight corruption and educate the public about what their darn government is up to. And you're doing a public service in helping us today explain how this budget process impacts your fundamental rights and whether or not we're going to have a free and fair election next year. That's what's on the table come the end of the month. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Clyde. Thank you, and we'll be here next time with another Judicial Watch update. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and like our video down below.